to ensure that we can leverage, sorry, I need to take it again. Okay. Do I take it from the beginning or just where I stopped?
Okay, you can take it from the beginning.
Okay.
But then again, if you stumble anything, don't worry, just keep going.
Okay.
Whatever because we can edit, whatever we want to use, we can do that.
Okay.
So as much as possible,
word the right word.
Forget the cameras.
Yeah.
As much as you look indirectly.
I know.
I thought I would forget the camera until you said we have to face the camera.
Okay, great. Cool.
So, but it's fine. As you go through, you'll be a lot more comfortable. Okay. Any other thing you want to move out of the way? Yeah. Any bags? Any? Just hold them for you.
Okay.
Awesome. Do you want to?
Is that okay?
You can fill your glasses with water as you go.
Again.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. I think I can do the same thing here.
Thank you.
I know. We did think about it, but we didn't want it to be too scripted. Yeah, exactly. So.
We're doing great.
Well, you're doing great.
Just just to find sometimes you want to say exactly the right word, and then you're like, oh, well, that wasn't it. Okay, good.
So, like I said, it was good, and just
keep going. Okay, so can I just start from where I said we were passionate?
No, start from the beginning.
I should. Okay, no problem.
Just say, but it doesn't have to be word for word. That's what I'm just trying
to
say.
Yeah.
So if you stumble, not a problem. Just keep going.
Okay, good, no problem.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashim Egonjobi, Country Manager for Elevate Nigeria. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's digital dialogue. Elevate Nigeria is an academy offering executive programs, specialized technical training, and IT certifications in emerging technologies. We're especially passionate about growth and business development in this ever-evolving and constantly changing digital landscape. Today's discussion centers on the knowledge economy, a pathway to Nigeria's digitally enabled future. But what does that mean? Well, to help break all this down, but more importantly, explain how it is relevant for you, I'm joined today by technology pioneers and thought leaders in the digital space. Together, we're going to dissect the realities of Nigeria's digital landscape and its role on the global stage. But before I begin, we're streaming this live, and I'm excited to see so many of you having joined in. I'd like to invite you to join the conversation online and using the hashtag Elevate Nigeria, and that is ELEV figure 8 Nigeria. Let's get started. Seated to my left, I have Dr. Omawala Johnson. Welcome, madam.
Thank you, Asha.
Dr. Johnson is a senior partner at TLCom Capital, and of course, also former Minister of Communication Technology between 2011 and 2015. I'm also delighted to welcome Mr. Olatubosun Alake, the Special Advisor for Innovation and Technology to the Governor of Lagos State. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
I also have with me today Mr. Ian Ulua Aboyeji, General Partner and Co-founder of Future Africa.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here today. And last but certainly not least, we also have with us today Mrs. Ola Williams, Director at Microsoft for Cloud and Digital Transformation for Middle East and the African multi-country cluster. Welcome.
Thank you, Oshin.
Okay. Recently, I read an article published by the Forbes magazine saying that COVID-19 was seen as the great accelerator of digital transformation. Interestingly, it seemed as though customers and consumers transformed overnight into digital customers, asking companies to be ever ready to serve them in a new form and new fashion. My question here, Dr. Johnson, in your view, what is the level of digital maturity of the different industries and businesses, especially in Nigeria?
I think there's an obvious answer. I think the most digitally mature industry, I think, is the financial services. I know when I cut my teeth on programming, we're programming for banks even as far as 20 years ago. So I think they're probably the most digitally mature in the sense of both using technology internally and also externally to serve their clients. Which is the most digitally immature? I'll just go across the spectrum. I think the most digitally immature would be education, because I think that's really where we're falling behind, whether it's using technology in the classrooms, using technology within the schools in terms of administration. So I think those are the two ends of the spectrum, I would say. Financial services, very digitally mature, and education really struggling. Although things have got better since COVID, but still struggling.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Going on that, I'd like to pose a question to Mrs. Williams. I know that Microsoft has several different programs, especially when we talk about the educational sector. In your view, how has the focus on digital transformation helped that cause?
So thank you. That's a very important question, especially looking at the situation that we are today. Microsoft as an organization, as many of you may know, our key mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And that is at the core of everything we do, including, creating curriculum, building technology IP that can actually enable people to learn quickly. There are a lot of initiatives that we are running that are supporting the education system across the globe. And this is something that can really be leveraged by Nigerians as well. I think most recently during COVID, we realized that a lot of people will most likely lose their job, which is actually the reality. And because we own LinkedIn and we also know based on data and insight, we've been able to identify top 10 in-demand skills. And we curated courses that can help people to really prepare to learn those role. That's one of the ways that we're helping. Apart from that, we also have built courses in line with the demand of the market around cloud computing, data and analytics, blockchain that people can actually take on to prepare them for these changes that we're experiencing. And of course, we also partner with different organizations, our learning partners, to make sure that all our courses are aligned to the future demand of market and as well as what is obtainable right now. So there are a lot of initiatives, and even with government and schools, we embrace a lot of schools to look at our education curriculum and make sure that digitization is part of the curriculum right from the primary school age. So there are different initiatives that is also being powered by our philanthropist team to empower this drive across all the spectrum, either education or with the corporate organization or even with government.
Thanks, Mrs. Williams. I think you talked about kind of having those right capabilities, and that's such an interesting point. And here I'd like to speak with Mr. Alake and just find out, well, where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth across upskilling, having the right skills when we talk about kind of the public sector as well?
So thank you very much for that question. I think looking at the greatest areas of opportunity and just analyzing the entire civic subsector, education is a very, very key sector that we think is ripe for disruption. And when this present administration came in, it was important that we rearranged our priorities towards that objective. And, you know, Lagos State is one of the states that as soon as we entered, we passed a budget that was twice the national average on spending in education, because we realized that that is where we are really going to change just not the narrative, but actually input the kinds of digital skills that we need to grow the economy. Financial services, of course, has a life of its own, and that's also important for financial inclusion and even improving the tax base. You know, so these are areas that we are utilizing in financial services, and of course the education sector. There is a lot of investment currently by the state, and there are really innovative win-win partnerships with private sector people, the likes of Microsoft. We recently just launched a program in September with Oracle, Oracle for Startups, where we take certain promising startups and put them through a program where they can learn some of the technical resources they might need to run their businesses. So we're really looking at education as a place that, you know, is ripe for disruption. We talk to a lot of partners within the sector as well to bring some of their solutions. And as government, we are able to give them the access, the testing capabilities, the sandbox for them to be able to get their products working and really improve the level of education in the state.
Really interesting point. You just spoke about that sandbox environment, which really enables participants to try out, to experiment without really breaking anything, right? And that sandbox experience, I think, is where, as Elevate, for instance, we are really passionate about ensuring that we can equip leaders and we can equip trainees with that environment to be able to try out those tools. And now, Mr. Aboyeji, I know that you have, in your current and your past lives, had a lot to do with regards to, equipping the young generation, especially with regards to these important and necessary skills. Can you talk a little bit around, where you see that kind of biggest scope for these skills being applied for this generation?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the most, a lot of people kind of think about the downsides when they talk about what has happened in digital transformation, particularly with COVID. But, I'm more or less an optimist. So my preference is to actually look at what positive has changed. And the reality is that we're now in a world where anybody can do any job anywhere, right? And that completely changes the dynamics, because what that generally means is that all of a sudden, let's just say across Africa, we have 300 jobs that we need to create in order to absorb the young people that are now coming into the workforce over the next 20 to 30 years. It would have been very difficult for you to have envisioned a world where those 300 million jobs can be created in our geographic location. But as a result of COVID, those boundaries have now been expanded to include the entire world. And the skill sets are not very different, regardless of where you are. So the beautiful thing about what is possible now is that you can now train people to be world-class talent, to be leveraged anywhere in the world. And I think that's the real opportunity that we can start to look at. What are the biggest opportunities for us to contribute, or for our talent, our human resources to contribute at the global stage? And doing that actually solves a lot of problems, from foreign exchange, earning issues, to being able to dutifully engage our youth, to being able to build out capabilities that can then be translated locally, to building entire new business models that then creates the kind of market creating innovation that can then allow governments to earn more in taxes, which would then go on to improve the education system and the healthcare system and so on and so forth. So the ripple effects are immense. But it's going to start with a realization that none of this is possible without a deep investment in digital infrastructure and digital platforms. And when we talk about digital infrastructure, what we're talking about is really the basics, right? Internet, power, laptops, you know. When we're talking about digital platforms, we're talking about the kind of enablement that has to happen, from the point of global platforms like Microsoft and Google and Salesforce in terms of bringing together and making it easy for talented young people to be able to access, right, the right kind of knowledge and skills, and also the right opportunities around the globe for them to be useful. So I think that's the frontier that we're quickly approaching, and it would require a lot of concerted efforts from multiple stakeholders for us to achieve it, but it's doable.
I want to take you back a little bit. You spoke about exactly kind of these jobs of the future, right? There was a study, I think maybe 2 years ago, by the Institute of the Future that said that between 65 and 85% of the jobs by 2030, in fact, do not exist yet. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that, especially in our local context?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that that is absolutely true. And there's also no question that that will continue to be true. Even if they didn't say so, if you think about the kind of jobs that we were excited about, say, even as little as 2015 versus what is now possible now. Back in 2015, we were building Andela. We're super excited about being able to teach people to build software. Today, you have no-code platforms that don't require you to learn software and can almost do the same thing. So there's no question that the jobs will be different. The question then is, how do you give people a skill set and a sustainable model for encouraging them to learn and earn so that that cycle continues to be complete, right? So yeah, you may have started out with software jobs, which kind of take a long time to train for and may require much more specialized investment. But now that there are opportunities being created by SaaS, software as a service platforms, and the need for people to support leaders undergoing digital transformation in leveraging these tools. Now that there's no-code platforms that allow you to create technology to support specific processes for companies that are undergoing this digital transformation process. These are new opportunities that maybe take less time for us to train for and actually have practical applications in the local ecosystem.
Thanks very much. I want to go back to Mr. Alake. From a kind of public sector perspective, what are the skills that you believe citizens should be investing into?
I think Ian mentioned a few of those, and we think just looking at the next 5 to 10 years and the changes in the industry, definitely the top coding skills that people are able to use to deliver different kinds of products, we think are very important. We do not have as much saturation to the level that we would like to see, and that informs our investment in some of these areas and our partnerships with, the big technology firms. So we think coding skills, artificial intelligence skills, blockchain, some of these things will become increasingly important because the needs of the future are beginning to change. And so our investment is really directed in some of those areas. We also think skills like critical thinking, right, are very, very important because I've been a product manager once, and really, how do you move from a certain point to another point if you hit a brick wall, right? Those are very important problem-solving skills that we think we need to imbibe in young people. Decision-making as well. How do we make the kinds of decisions that will lend well to the civic environment, in governance and things like that. So these are some of the skills that we see will become increasingly important as more mundane tasks are taken out of the work environment.
You spoke a little bit about those ABCDs of digital transformation, right? So artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud, cybersecurity, data. Dr. Johnson, I'd like to pose the question to you. As an organization, especially in its leadership, where do you think leaders should take the cue from when they hear all these buzzwords? How do you take it forward?
It's not an easy question, but I think you have to start from if you lead an organization, what do you do? And thinking about what you do and how is the context changing and affecting what you do as an organization, whether you're a bank or a logistics company or a school, whatever it is, you have to think around that context. And then when you think around that context, the next thing is that if you look at the ABCDs that you've spoken about, which of these new technologies or these new ways of doing things are going to affect you the most? And if I use the example of financial services, which is probably the easiest one, I said they're the most sort of digitally mature, they are the ones that actually are, if you're a leader of a financial institution or a fintech, whatever it is, you are the ones that are grappling with almost every single one of those four sort of new technologies, so to speak, whether it's artificial intelligence, the way that you look at your customer data and the way that you then develop products and services out of understanding that data. If it's cloud, you really are having a lot of information. How do you store that securely? So it depends on where you are, the kind of business that you're running. But then you can also bring it down. You can talk about the big financial institutions, but you can also look at the smaller businesses. And when I look at Africa or look at Nigeria, for me, the future is going to be lots of these very small businesses. And that's what we're finding as we invest in tech companies across the continent. It's really people that serve the very small businesses. And looking at, if you're in a very sort of small business, you're a medium or micro-sized business, you may not understand all these technologies. But I think what is happening now is that it's almost intuitive sometimes. You may not understand what AI is or what cybersecurity is, but I just give the recent example of what happened in Nigeria with the NSAS protest. I was reading one of the articles. Somebody whose shop had been looted, and what she was saying then was that it just makes you think that, do I really need a store anymore if I'm faced with these kind of infrastructural challenges? And so even though she may not understand online and e-commerce and AI and data mining, she will begin to understand those things because the context has changed. So it depends on what you're doing, but I think it's still very important to understand those different technologies.
Thank you so much for that really kind of broad answer. We recently commissioned a research report, and it showed that in fact 80% of the skills required to be successful, to be competitive, to be efficient or effective were digital skills. And it begs the question of that reskilling revolution as it's been themed previously. Mrs. Williams, would you like to talk about a little bit about that revolution of skills and reskilling, especially in the enterprise sector?
Okay, that's a very big topic in the mind of every organization, especially in the enterprise sector. Let me take a clue from my company as an example. I think when I joined the organization, I recall then Exchange, what people do email, was predominantly on-premise at the data center of most of the banks or the telco company. But today, most of these services are available in the cloud. So that then begs the question, how do we reskill people that are administering these services to different organizations? Internally, we also took a decision to skill people to be able to help organizations to do that intuitively. And we're not only looking at us as an organization, we're looking at our customers that are consuming the services and helping them to understand where do they want to be in the future? What are the drivers in the industry that are necessitating the changes that we're seeing today? How do they intend to get there? Of course, we need the workforce. So that builds the need to reskill existing workforce, or even look at young talent, bringing in young talent with the right skill set within the organization. But do we have everyone prepared to take on these new roles? Possibly not. But there are initiatives that organizations are landing today. For example, we have what we call enterprise skilling initiative with most of our enterprise customers, because they understand that for them to continue to be competitive in terms of attracting the right talent, retaining the right talent and also delighting their customers who are also digital savvy. They need to equip the workforce. So that is something that is top of mind. And that is also bringing about, how do we ensure that we also have the right set of organization, partner with right set of organization that drives this kind of, delivery of those solutions, either from within internal in Microsoft or with our partners such as organizations like Elevate. And we've seen a lot of impact in equipping our learning partners to have the right skills for now and for the future, so that they are in a good position to help our customers to take on this journey of reskilling their workforce. That's on the part of the internal resources, because most of the job that they do today might not be relevant in the future, as we've all agreed here. But now is also about talent, incoming talent. Organizations should also be thinking about how they need to partner with learning organizations or schools to make sure that the young talent that will be coming into the workforce in the next 2 to 3 years or 5 years are also prepared. And that's why this collective effort from, technology company, government, the private sector is very, very important. So it's not just about looking at it from the point of view of how do we reskill people internally that we already have that employee. We also need to think about how do we skill up the skills, the talent that will be coming into the organization in the future. That is also an equally important topic that should be top of mind for any enterprise organization today.
Thank you very much for that. I want to talk a little bit about disruption. We've all agreed here today that COVID-19 has been that great accelerator, but certainly has been also very disruptive for businesses. Now, a question I'd like to ask you, Mr. Aboyeji, is what other risks do you see for the growth of the ICT sector in Nigeria, but also in Africa, with regard to its future development? Statistics have it that that sector is going to grow by about 23% in the next 2-3 years. How do you see that?
Thank you for that question. I think, as a naturally optimistic person, I definitely align with a lot of the growth prospects and a lot of thought that's going into thinking about how ICT can enable things grow. But I think there are definitely certain risks that may be understated, even as that continues to remain a point of focus. I'll mention about 3, right? Although there are more. I think the first is really talent. Talent continues to be a big pain point for technology companies, and it will grow as a pain point, particularly given particular circumstances in Nigeria and around the continent. What do I mean by that? We're currently witnessing an incredible shift in the global talent needs. And that means that, organizations outside of the country are now much more, because they're undergoing the same digital transformation as we are, in need of talent. And at the end of the day, when it comes to talent, it's important for us to start thinking very creatively about quality of life and about how that tends to play into the decisions that young people decide to make about where they want to build careers and families and ultimately their lives. And my fear is that if we don't quickly work very closely with the government to establish some baselines or safe spaces, if you can call it that, what will end up happening is people will find those safe spaces elsewhere. That will continue to put pressure on the best of our talent efforts, because generally, we can train as many as we want, but if they're all leaving in 2 years, there's no institutional knowledge. The second in my mind is cybersecurity, right? We're currently sitting, particularly in the very mature financial services industry, on a bit of a ticking time bomb when it comes to the security and safety of digital assets, primarily because of a lack of willingness to share information and also as a result of a lack of a coordinated government response to cyber issues, primarily because the capacity doesn't exist. And the danger with that is that you really run the risk of digitally transforming a lot of people and then sending them down the cliff, which could be disastrous, because ultimately the risk with increasing digital transformation is that the internet and digital becomes a single point of failure. So, if coordinated attacks are done today across 23 banks, we have a real problem on our hands, right? From a strategic point of view. And also, even with respect to physical assets, our infrastructure is not resilient enough. I think we've put too much of it in Lagos. We have about 60% of the country's internet capacity in Lagos. We have one single thread that connects the landing cables to the island and the mainland. And we're not de-risked enough. And there has to be a concerted plan as a country about how do we manage the assets. Because if the internet goes out, and trust me, it has happened inadvertently, those risks have become real. We will have a completely different economy. And the first point I raised, which is talent, then becomes even further exacerbated, because if you can't make a living over the internet, then what are you doing in the country? The final thing is policy alignment. There's a lot of very smart people in the government who understand the opportunity, and they're doing their best to move us in that direction. At the same time, there are quite a number of people who may not fully understand the risk of inaction, and also the risk of the lack of policy coherence when it comes to investments in technology. And I think that's more at the country level, because what's going to happen ultimately is that a lot of countries are currently investing deeply in digital infrastructure and in digital platforms, from Rwanda to Kenya, all over the world, all over Africa as well. And like I said, the risk is the opportunity, which is that anybody can do any work from anywhere. And all you have to do is lose out in the battle for centers of excellence for you to basically just become a drain pipe. And the only way that investors are going to be willing to partner with you when it comes to digital infrastructure and digital platforms is if they feel like you have some long-term policy stability that gives things an opportunity to germinate and grow. So if Microsoft is making $100 million investment in, African Development Center, and at some point they cannot be guaranteed of some level of policy stability, corporate decision will be made in Redmond, and it will not be emotional. It will basically be, let's move those resources to where we can be assured of that stability. So there's a need for more policy coherence with the government. I would be honest and say the biggest risk point is the government. I think other people kind of understand the urgency of the times and are willing to move in that direction. But if the government continues to be a point of failure for those efforts, I think what will just happen is, we will become a drain pipe for talent and opportunities, which would be unfortunate.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Can I just add?
Yes, I was about to come to you actually, because I felt like, having had that, 30,000 feet perspective,
Absolutely.
You certainly would have something to add here.
Yes, I do. And it's to do with the last point. I mean, having been a former policymaker myself, the last point about policy coherence. I think that is so important. So, I sat in the ICT industry looking at digital infrastructure, because when you look at, internet, what is it about? It's fiber, it's satellite, and all of that. Now, you can't do that alone, because you need power to do that. You need works to do that. People are going to build the roads, build the what's it called? The duct pipes and everything. So there's that tremendous coordination across several arms of government. It's not an easy thing to do, because here you are we're all in tech. We understand the requirements. But not everybody understands that. People pick up a phone and they make a call and they don't understand that actually that is $25 billion, $30 billion worth of investment for you to actually make that single telephone call or or send an email. So I think what you said is very, very important. It's around that, not only a narrative that is coming from government, because that's also, it's very important. Not even before you start the policies, if you're talking about things that the Microsofts or the Googles or even the Nigerian entrepreneurs want to hear about, what are you doing? How are you thinking? That is almost the beginning of that. Okay, I think this is something's going to happen here, and then you start the policy, formulation. But what is also important, I wanted to just raise that here, is that we say government, but you know the truth about it is that it's not only government. When you're talking about policy formulation, the most important thing I found when I was in a minister was that it's that engagement between government and the private sector. It is critically important because you can sit up in Abuja or wherever it is your capital is and think you're doing this fantastic, because you can do a wonderful policy without talking to anybody. All you have to do is go on the internet. What did Rwanda do? What did Kenya do? What did South Africa do? And put it all together, you've got a beautiful thing. But if you're talking to the industry, you find that actually what I thought was a good thing is not a good thing because X, Y, Z. So I think that the point I wanted to make in a very long-winded manner was that yes, it's government, but there's a very important part of it that is engagement and collaboration between government and the private sector to get the policies that will actually make sense for your particular context and your particular country.
I see you. Oh, this is a hot topic here. So maybe we'll first go to Mr. Alake because I see you nodding and nodding.
Yeah. So, let me just acknowledge, I think both contributions, very, very important. I think coming into government last year, I kind of saw where some of the gaps were. And it's particularly to the point of engagement that she spoke about. There are a lot of people in government wanting to implement the right policies, design the right policies, but there hasn't been perhaps a more structured environment where there are exchanges. And it's the iceberg philosophy. It's the people on the ground that really understand what is needed and what kinds of interventions or policy frameworks that can unlock value for them. So I think one of the things, and I'm even speaking from the Lagos context here as a subnational, one of the things that I did in my office is about a year old, and it was created for these sorts of engagement points. Our first event brought about policymakers, tech enthusiasts, people in the tech environment to discuss and see exactly, what are your pain points? What exactly is the government doing or not doing to be able to help you unlock value? Right, and out of that first engagement point came our master plan last year, the first innovation and technology master plan for Lagos. Now, with the advent of COVID-19 and other existential risk factors, we've seen that, look, there is a need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate some of those priorities. And in December of this year, we are having an ideathon with some private sector partners as well. And one of the members of the House of Assembly, Lagos State, the chairman on science and tech, would also be there. And so there are some commitments from them as well that, look, we really want to hear out what's going on at the really grassroots level, and give commitments to implementing some of these things that are possible. So I think that engagement really did not, if it existed, it was not properly structured. But I think now we're beginning to see some little level of engagement because of the existential factors that Ian mentioned. And that also is putting some urgency to some of the work. So I think there is some work that is starting, but I think it needs to be turbocharged on a national level.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
it. Yeah.
I think he kind of touched on some of the points that is very important for us to reconsider. I want to thank you for bringing up this topic because it's very important to the conversation and to the extent to which we can really transform. Because the reality is the government is the enabler. And I think Dr. Johnson actually mentioned some of the challenges. But let's also look at it from the point of view of, the planning, which he touched on. The planning, yes, some states are doing a couple of things, but we need a holistic policy at the federal level and a strong commitment to execution. But it's not something that we should be looking at. Yes, it's government doing it. There are a lot of organizations today that have partnered with different countries worldwide that have been able to do this successfully. We need to open up more to fresh ideas, partnership in a very constructive way, and the level of commitment and the political will to drive execution is also very, very important, because we can do all the planning, but how do we also ensure that in our planning we are really looking at driving the execution, and we know that we can hold someone responsible for how the execution is being landed, and we can measure the result. That way, I think we'll begin to do. It's not going to happen overnight, but we need to take those baby steps.
Can I say something? Just I started the fire stop. I'm very well aware of the challenges. As somebody who's been with the government, trying these engagements, seeing the challenges from the point of view of the multinationals. At the heart of the challenge is a challenge with different levels of education about the opportunities as well as the threats that accompany a digital transformation process. And it's going to be very difficult because of the nature of our political process. And this is a very Nigeria-specific point, but I think other African countries can attest to work with the political process. This might sound heretic, but it's the fact. The political process is very complex, requires a lot of consensus, and a lot of the people don't have the patience or the incentive to really understand the issues. Which is why what I've advocated to the government is that an easy cop-out is to designate special zones. Yeah. With special zones, you don't need as much consensus. Private entities can be given the freedom to operate, given the urgency with which these problems must be resolved. And you get results faster that can then convince a wider stakeholder group that this is not just English, from abroad. These are real results, challenges, opportunities. And also it creates a platform for scale, because even when we, the private sector, are engaging with government, we don't know for sure that everything we are saying you should do will work. We ourselves are also running experiments.
Absolutely.
So if you don't create a safe space or a sandbox, as Mr. Alake said, for both parties to engage and figure out what works, you will quickly end up with chaos and anarchy on the one hand of the spectrum, even when you are fully permitted all that is permissible. And on the other hand of the spectrum, you create a rigid structure that, like I said, becomes a drain pipe for talent and opportunity for the country. So the middle ground is create a special economic zone, hand it over to private sector. Say, this is your sandbox. If it works, I'll take it. I can make the case with data to the rest of the stakeholders. And it wouldn't be a long conversation, because it'd be a question of, do you want jobs for your young people, progress for your constituents, or not? And I think every politician's answer would obviously be yes. As opposed to having a long drawn out conversation and trying to pull together multivariate stakeholders with different interests and priorities. That is a long process, and it's almost destined to fail.
Absolutely agree. And I'm waiting to see if there's a disagreement here. So before we move to the next point.
So I wouldn't call it a disagreement. In fact, an agreement on many levels. And I wanted to bring out some of the things he mentioned and draw out specific examples. Again, from the subnational Lagos perspective. So we do realize the importance of safe zones, and this has informed one of the proposed projects that Lagos is taking on currently, which is the Yaba ICT Hub that is really supposed to be designed. And I know Ms. Johnson knows quite a bit about that, which is supposed to be designed as a safe space of sorts for value to be unlocked through the enablement, whether it's the application of infrastructure, fiber optic a ring around there, leasing, building sites, land grants, then the financing of research, and policy enablement for people that will contribute in that particular space. So this is ongoing. Again, there's a lot of experimentation because in our local context, there are risks that we do not fully understand yet. So sometimes the studying of some of these outcomes take time. And so it's sometimes the government looks like it's not doing anything, but it's measuring a lot of things just because it has that overarching view of different factors. But definitely, at least from the subnational point of view, this is something that has already started. And of course, when he mentioned the enablement, if you are aware, Lagos State launched, and this was one of the key initiatives of the governor that also came out of the engagement point, which is the 3,000-kilometer fiber optic ring around Lagos. Now, that is so important because it's not just government deploying fiber, but putting enabling infrastructure. So for instance, putting 6 core docks. We do understand that one of the critical cost elements, overhead elements for infrastructure providers is the civic work and the infrastructure that they lay in the ground or put up on the poles. Now, how can we reduce those costs so that costs can be passed along, reduction in costs can be passed along to customers, right? And it's by laying, the 6 core docks so that, an MTN or a Glo, they don't need to dig the ground anymore. Just pass your cables through there, a reduction in costs, increase in speed of deployment. And we see those kinds of trickle down factors that would ultimately lend growth to the ecosystem. So there are a number of things that are going on. I think one of the issues we have too is the advocacy of some of these things and the propagation of some of the projects that are going on so that the right private sector partners can also participate.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a hot topic here. We would love to hear from you online. Follow the hashtag Elevate Nigeria and join the conversation. While we were just speaking a lot about government and policy making, I think the other side, of course, is also the private sector. And here I'd like to come back to Dr. Johnson because throughout your pretty remarkable career, you've been in private sector, you've been in public sector. So my question for you would be, where do you see the real opportunities for investment or the need for investment for the private sector? Is it in the people, in the reskilling, in the leadership, in the technology, or a bit of everything?
All of the above. But I think that there are 2 major things I would say, and we've spoken quite a lot about the first, which is talent and skills. I think we're a country of 200 million people, more than half of us are young, but we don't have a lot of skills or talent. So that investment, not only by the private sector, but also by government, investment in skills and talent and capacity building at all levels. It's not just about the sort of high-tech skills that we've spoken about. It's also about some of the low-tech skills that we speak about. It's who's going to build that infrastructure. Somebody's got to lay the cable. Somebody's going to climb those base stations and put the radios there. Somebody's going to do the power. So it's really around skills all across the board. And if there's anything that I would say that we should invest in, I think it is those skills across board, vocational and the high-tech skills. The second, what was your question again? The first, the second, private sector. Okay, yes. The second one I think is around, what would I call it now? I think it's capital. And I say capital because these things cost money. So, and we know now we don't have to imagine very much that the government does not have enough money to do the things that we need to do. If you look at digital infrastructure, and I remember when we did the studies around the parts of Nigeria that didn't have digital infrastructure, it was something like $14 billion that had to be invested in those parts where it really didn't make economic sense, quite honestly, as far as the private sector is concerned to do that. And so that's when I say capital, again, government and private sector working together to say, where do we need to put the capital that makes sense? Even though it makes sense, it may not make commercial sense, but it makes development sense, and how do we partner with, how does government and private sector partner to do that? I think also capital in terms of what I do now, which I think is critically important, of course, but it's what, of course, what Inge does as well, and many other people across continent, and that is investing in companies that are going to make the difference, that are going to be I hate to use the word, it always sounds a bit negative, that are going to be the disruptors, that are going to be the ones that fix broken value chains, that are going to be the ones that innovate and do things differently and solve some of the problems that we have as administrations, over 60 years, we really haven't been able to solve. And there are young Nigerians or young Africans that are using technology, innovating, thinking very differently and solving these problems, one challenge at a time. But they need capital. And that is a capital that really doesn't exist in many African countries today. Capital that says, here's $1 million, you may fail. But at least if you fail, we've learned something. That capital doesn't exist. And really, that's the second most important thing that I think we need to do. Finally, I just want to say this, when I was in government many years ago, I made, this was when the whole sort of VC in venture capital in Nigeria was starting, or even in Africa. And then we were talking about, I think maybe $100-200 million had come in. Every year it doubles. I think 2019, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was something like $2 billion came into the continent. Now, out of that $2 billion, half of it comes into Nigeria. And that is capital that really, there is no collateral. There is no security. That is capital just, I'm betting on a young person to build a good, successful business. And that's the second thing that we really need. A lot of it is coming from outside Nigeria, outside Africa. We need to have that capital, and the capital exists. Bring that capital into these kind of businesses.
Right. It's such a great point you make, actually. The capital exists, but like on the continent, actually. So how do we deploy it amongst ourselves as well? And Mrs. Williams, I'd like to actually get your opinion here. Obviously, in your role, you have a Pan-African and kind of, Middle East view as well. Do you see specific investments, especially by private sector enterprises, being done in any of the other countries that maybe we're missing out here, or is Nigeria leading the way?
Very good question. I'll answer it this way. We have the potential here in Nigeria. Africa is a very evolving continent, and a lot of focus is on Africa. And if you look at Africa, Nigeria actually is, in terms of population and GDP and the potential, Nigeria, I'll say, comes first. So there's a lot of focus on investment coming into Nigeria. So to answer your question directly, I see most investment wants to come into Nigeria, but can we also look at what are the enabling environment? For example, I think about almost 2 years ago, Microsoft made a bet on Nigeria by bringing ADC to Nigeria. I think for what it was, TechExpert is also one of the, too long, but we did it eventually because we have people advocating for the potential, and the numbers also speak for itself in terms of the young population that we have. And I think the more we invest in that, we can actually harvest those opportunity by, making deliberate effort. This is effort of some people, sitting in red mud across the table, advocating for Nigeria. But we can look at a situation where we really have solid policies that it attracts the right level of investment. Ghana here, our next door neighbor, is attracting a lot of investment lately, and we can check the numbers. But if you look at it in terms of numbers of people, young people, potential, Nigeria should actually be taking that large chunk of investment coming into Africa. We have the opportunity, but what are we doing about the opportunity? That's the question. And that's something that we really need to think deeply about. So it's not just because we have maybe some Nigerians sitting at the helm of affair in some multinational organization, or the individual effort of the startups, that we see here and there, but we can actually see government inviting the private sector, the multinationals, the organizations that have really helped countries across the globe to transform, and invite them to a round table to say, this is our plan for the next 10 years. For our younger folk, how can you come in to help us with this? And for all intent and purpose, most of these organizations already have the structure in place. that are just waiting for for governments to really tap into, and that model works. If we look at what Microsoft has done, especially in Africa or even across the globe, today we have different models in which we help to train people. And I would like to share a story of the success story we have with TechExpert, which is a sister company of Elevate. When we launched ADC in Nigeria, we brought in a program called LEAP program. The program is meant to help people that are not necessarily in technology field to start a career in technology, no matter who you are, whether you are a nurse or a hairdresser or a pharmacist. You can go through a 6 weeks program that will prepare you for a career in technology. In the last couple of months, about 20 people were sponsored by TechExpert, female, because we're focusing on gender diversity for this region. And today, 20 of them have been employed by TechExpert. We can imagine the ripple effect if we have this being championed by government and we have private sectors latch onto that program. And, we can multiply the effect. And I think if you look over the internet, LinkedIn and so on, we have testimonies of these young women, very excited about the potential and the opportunity, not only for them, but for people around their family, their friends, really, changing the trajectory of their life because they have a new sense of livelihood. So those are the ways that we really need to think about around the table and get a structured approach towards this. So it's not just enough for, the Andelas of this world, the TechExperts of this world, and of course, a couple of other organizations, but we need a very deliberate effort towards achieving this feast. And we have the potential, honestly. It's just something
very
that
passionate about it, clearly. And we love the passion. And I'm going to take it to Ian, because I see that you're kind of nodding and, smiling a little bit. And my question really is actually you kind of sit in that very interesting intersection between talent and, of course, also on the capital side, exactly what Dr. Johnson was talking about. You also touched on something else previously, though. You talked on flight risk, and you also on talent flight risk, and you also talked a little bit around the gig economy. So do you see a risk for companies investing, say, in talent, and then this talent being a flight risk, or us, Nigeria, losing this talent to, say, the gig economy?
Well, you see, my approach in thinking about that question is, look, you can't undergo a digital transformation process without talent. DOA, right? So, it will be a priority no matter what it costs. The question would then be, will the returns match the investment? And many times it still does, even if it's expensive, right? But obviously, like any company, you want to improve that return over time. And so if you're thinking in that way, your approach to these things is really thinking about it as pipeline, not thinking about it as assets. Do you understand? So when you're thinking about it as pipeline, you understand that flight risk may be high for reasons that are outside of your control, right? Somebody decides, look, I won't be harassed by SARS in Germany, so let me go, right? It's a valid concern, and I've had those conversations with many young people in the course of my career. At the same time, if we're invested in scaling some of what, Mrs. Ola has said, you now have an opportunity to replace those people. Plus, you get the aspirational element, which is really kind of interesting, which is, okay, I can be here for 24 months, 36 months, and then I go to Germany. But this is a rite of passage for me. It's expensive, is it? Building pipeline is expensive. It's not always the most sustainable way to build out an enterprise. And it's definitely not what I would recommend in a perfect world. However, we are where we are, and it is what it is.
So we've all just got to chip in and make it happen.
You don't have an option, really. So if you want to run a business that's technology dependent in this country, you got to think in terms of your talent as pipeline and not assets. You appreciate them for the 2-3 years that they can spend with you, learning and growing. And you usher them into a fantastic alumni group that you hope one day, when conditions are right, will find its way back to you.
But it's the scale that matters as well, and what Ola was saying, and I love that, building a pipeline instead of an asset, very interesting. But if we do it at scale, then it doesn't, not that it doesn't matter, but it matters less. So if you're training, it costs yes, unit economics, it costs less. If you're training hundreds of thousands or skilling or reskilling hundreds of thousands of young people, if a few thousand leave, then your pipeline is still there. And that's really what I think has been missing. We are a country of scale, but somehow we don't seem to operate at scale. And I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's that private public sector collaboration, whatever it is, but we just haven't really been able to do things at the scale that is required so that we make that bigger impact. We have a bigger return on investment. And when this talent leaves, and they will leave, they will leave. It really wouldn't impact us that much.
Can I say something? I just want to quickly chip in.
Please go.
Very important. Which is, I don't understand your point about, I don't understand why we can't.
Well, I do, but
well, it's a long story. Okay, it's a long story. I want to make a point, because I think the problem really has been that a lot of people, particularly in government and even in positions of leadership in the business community, don't understand that scaling technology is very different from other kinds of scale. Because the vast majority of the assets are human. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So they're applying old rules.
So you think you're scaling branches of filling stations. I mean, a branch costs 100 million. Give or take, it would end up at that number, no matter where you build it. I mean, you can predict how that would scale. But the thing about human beings is that one human being can create 10 times impact. Another human being, under the same circumstances of training, will create 3 times impact. And it's your ability to identify scalers, right? And plug them into a meritocratic network that supports policy and private sector efforts at scaling. But oftentimes, I think there is an assumption that scaling in tech, particularly, and with talent, is the same as scaling in other industries. So it really doesn't matter who you pick. You can do an RFP, and whoever is the cheapest will scale. And then that's where the pitfall now starts to happen. And I think until the government understands that there are exceptionally talented scalers who are adept at this, and people have a track record of scaling in this environment, are brought into the room, and there's an understanding that those people's talent in scaling is the only way really to think about the problem and to dissect solutions that actually can help you get there. You're going to still have the same missteps. So people will make a lot of mistakes and learn ultimately, but at the end of the day, and just to close, I'll give you a practical example with Empower, right? Beautifully designed program. I was there from day one. I remember sitting down with Kabira Bashola, designing the program. I got Andela was very kind and dedicated resources to supporting it at the very early stages, allowed some of our people to even work on the curriculum. But I think there was this procurement mindset when it came to the scaling, right? And ultimately what ended up happening was you had a lot of people who didn't really understand how the program worked or how you could get to results. And there was now a fork, let me put it that way, where there was the Empower program, which, the scale and the impact is debatable. And then you had the Andela Learning Community programs, where the scale and impact is very visible and continues to be so. And obviously, ALC doesn't have as much resources as Empower, but has delivered maybe, several times more. So it's just a tale in what happens when there is a tendency to think about scaling in technology as the same as scaling in other industries, and it's wildly different.
I think it's a great point that you make, especially with regards to how do we assess the investment that we put especially into skilling, right? And how do we look at that skilling? It must come from a strategic perspective. We have to do that assessment. We have to then really ensure that we actually also measure, right, our return on that impact and on that investment. But how do we measure it? And I think at Elevate, actually, it's one of the things we do. We measure the impact at the beginning, and then we measure it at the at the end, right? And say, okay, well, what is your return? What do you stand to gain from it? And as we kind of come to a close of the session already, I'd like to actually start with Mr. Alake and say, we've talked a lot around this is what we expect from government and this is what we'd like. I think it would be interesting to say, what's the call to action from the government to the private sector? What do you expect?
So I think it's, I mentioned it earlier, the continuous engagement and perhaps the understanding that government in itself as an entity is a body full of different kinds of processes and all kinds of protocols and things like that. And I look at it, even coming from the private sector and into government, just even sometimes the structure that government operates currently might not lend to really rapid pace of development in certain areas. And, you know, I say that looking at the Lagos perspective, I think in Lagos, we've identified some of these things and hence my allusion to some of the things we are doing that I mentioned earlier. But if you look at the entire national perspective, even the level of exposure and education would lend to the priorities of that region. So you might not have it equal, you might have it disjointed, you know. And so I think one of the things as government, I think one of the areas that we really need to put the pedal to the metal is the education bit and the upskilling bit and really investing heavily. I find that, you know, education is one of the investments you might not reap in, say, 20 years, because the person starts at kindergarten, you know, to college, it's about 20-something years before you start seeing real tangible returns on investment. And I think government is the only one that has the kind of appetite for that. So I think, at least from Lagos, we are rearranging our priorities in that regard. But I think there's going to be, from the private sector, there needs to be a whole lot more engagement and partnership because the government really cannot do everything. Even today, the tax base of Lagos is so minimal that, you know, for it to be able to get the adequate funds to really invest there it could be a challenge at times. So I think it is forming the right partnerships to really invest in education and even improving other civic areas. And hopefully we will be able to put the pedal on the metal. I think what is required here, at least from the Lagos perspective, is the speed, because some of these things have been identified and are being done. But how does even government transform itself to be able to move faster? And that is a challenge for all governments around the world. But I think with the right partnerships and with the right engagement points, we can definitely spin the needle.
Thank you so much. I'll stay on my left side. Dr. Johnson, anything that you'd like to add with regards to having been both on the private and public sector?
I think what I would say is that there's got to be a change of mindset on both sides. On the sides of the government, whether national or subnational, is the fact that you are a catalyst and you cannot control everything. And I think that's where the mistake is. That we need to move from this sort of commanding heights of government that you control everything and you say who does what. You are a catalyst. So if it's about tech and about Yaba was the notion of Yaba as a tech center did not come from government. It came from people who were operating in the Yaba space. Before we knew it, there were 60 companies, 70 companies who were in tech, who were located in Yaba. How does government come in? Put in fiber, put in power, just leave these guys to run. So that's number one on the government side. The second thing around the call to action is for private sector to stop saying government must. You know, we are all, we can do these things. The environment may not be as enabling as it needs to be. The infrastructure may not be there, but we've seen it happen. People do things in spite of. And so it's that mindset that says that, you know, we're not going to fix this government in the next 5 or 10 years, quite honestly. But in the meantime, we have to build a business. In the meantime, we have to build a country. So that's what I say about the change of mindset. Government should be catalytic in its interventions and also understand that I can't control things. People will make money. People are going to lose money. People are, that's life. And so allow that to happen. And it is in that way that you actually build more robust and sustainable industries, whether it's tech or not.
Thank you so much. Now I'll go on the private sector side.
I was about to say, I was like, we changed our back. What are you talking about? It was like, we'll collect him back.
That potentially is the biggest collaboration that we can have, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, just based on the point I just made, I think I absolutely agree with the point about more engagement. What I'm excited about is that we have more people now who've kind of been on both sides of the divide. I know for myself, I mean, I've been part of a number of groups that have tried to kind of bridge that divide between public and private and increase the points of engagement. It's always tasking work because at the end of the day, there's hardliners on both sides. So you have to find a way to manage. In my language, say money. So you have to, but at the end of the day, I think one thing that I think we might need to come to a consensus around is the idea of understanding the constraints of the political process and understanding the need for speed, especially with respect to what needs to happen. Is there a way we can?
It happened before as well.
Well, I hope it doesn't affect the.
You understand what I'm saying, so that reforms can happen and they can be pods, you can call them that, for much larger transformation efforts, right? As opposed to a system where we're pressuring each side to do what is unnatural to them. It's pressuring government to be fast when we know it has to move with a horde of stakeholders that have different PMI, or pressuring private sector to conform to systems that are not designed for their success, right? So how do we come to a middle ground where we create safe space? I think that would be the major takeaway I would want policymakers as well as private sector to come together on it. And for me, India has done this, right? Malaysia has done this. Nepal is doing this, right? So there are countries, there are models that we can actually look at where people said, okay, fine, I have a very complex political process. You have a need for speed, but stability. It's very hard for us to combine those two. So why don't I create a safe space? China did this in Shenzhen. Let me create a safe space for you guys, for us to work together side by side. And then if it's successful, we can then export the lessons to the rest of the country because we have a proof points. So I think if there's more of that kind of conversation going on, a lot of the challenges will be resolved over a period of time.
Great, thank you. Ola, last words.
Thank you. I'm really happy that we're talking about these issues. And I think this kind of conversation is coming up in different forums. So, and everybody have spoken very well in terms of what needs to be done. I'll just add a few words to it. So yes, we understand the constraint on the part of government. We also understand the push and the drive from the private sector. One of the things that I think is working, and based on what I've seen here today and what I've heard, is having people that have experiences on this matter come into government. Someone like Mr. Lake is in government today, so he's able to bring in fresh ideas and perspective to how things could be done. I think he mentioned something around what was done with what's the program in Osun State that you mentioned about earlier, Empower. And when it goes to the stage of execution, something stalled. So, but if we have people in government, working for government, that will have experience from private sector, we will minimize those kind of, frictions. So I think we also need to look at those structures, and that is a decision that has to be taken at the, government level. And from private sector perspective as well, I think a lot of great work is happening in that area, right? But to Dr. Johnson's point, we need to do more, right? Doing more in the sense of, really also looking at doing more from helping to bridge the gap that we have now with the structures that we have in place, and of course the constraint from the from government perspective, because we can't actually fix that overnight. But the reality is we still need ownership from the policymaker. And what I'm very excited here is, with what has happened in the country in the last couple of weeks, there is an urgent need for us to look at how do we empower youth. It is super, super critical for our continuous success as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Food for thought. Today we've spoken about collaboration. We've spoken about the ABCDs of digital transformation, the reskilling revolution, and the need for organizations to continue to harness these emerging technologies to continue to be successful. At Elevate, we're really passionate about equipping leaders, teams, organizations to do exactly that. We hope that you've enjoyed the conversation today and invite you to continue to ask your questions and contribute online. Hashtag is Elevate Nigeria. And with that, I'd like to thank my brilliant panelists today.
Thank you.
It was a real pleasure having you all with us today. Your time, your insights, most especially the experience that you have brought to the table today was really invaluable. Thank you. And thank you, of course, to everybody who joined us today. We have enjoyed having you and hope that you've enjoyed it just as much. My name is Ashim Egonjobi, and from Elevate Nigeria, thank you. Till next time. Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was,
Yeah.
whoa, wow.
Ashim, I think you have a second job.
I think you did. That was
You're so
excellent.
amazing.
Oh, God.
Come on.